Hey friends, this is Erik the Mind Control Guy. I'm on my day off, wearing my PJs, got things to do in a little bit, so I'm kind of casual. Wearing my Bigfoot social distancing champion shirt. He wins. Anyway, what I'm going to talk about right now is, for longer than anybody could ever remember, there is a gazillion different topics that people talk about. And unfortunately, sometimes we have these people got a piece of paper in their hand that they got from university that says, "See right here, I is smart." And sometimes after you listen to some of these folks talk, they don't seem to be as intelligent as they would like people to believe that they are. And I've been an avid listener of Coast to Coast AM, late night radio talk show host, since the 90s when Mr. Art Bell had it. And then later he retired under unfortunate circumstances that, if true, was absolutely horrible, which I believe they were, and nobody or their family should have ever been subjected to what Art Bell was subjected to. And then Mike Siegel took it over, and since then it's been Mr. George Norrie, who I've talked to many times. And I haven't talked to probably in over 6 months now. And unfortunately, the reason I don't listen to Coast right now is because, just like so many other places in the country, you can't get people to go to work. Our warehouse, where I haul groceries from. You know, a good portion of the warehouse just want to keep calling off all the time. And it just gets to be ridiculous. You know, people say that, well, what about jobs? There's endless jobs. They got billboards out there. Everybody's hiring. But the conditioning process of those who infiltrated the country a long time ago, and they've gotten people conditioned into, they think socialism and communism is a wonderful thing. All you have to go is go to any American university or college and ask them what they think about socialism and communism. Ask these young skulls full of mush. And forgive me in advance if I misspeak. Sometimes I tend to do that. I think one thing and say something else, and sometimes I just misspeak. Sorry. Anyway, so we can't get people to come to work. So in my loads that pull, at midnight 30 or 1:30 in the morning, now are not coming out to like after Coast to Coast is over, so I don't get a chance to listen. I don't get a chance to talk to George. So, but anyway, a lot of folks that call Coast to Coast AM are, I should say, guests on the show. And you got people that, they sell books for a living. They write books, they sell books. They would rather keep the money they earn than have to fork it over to the IRS, who's been lying to the American public, and the private sector in particular, for over 77 years. And I've talked extensively on that before. And anyway, I respect people who want to write books for a living, try and sell books and stuff like that on any given topic. And unfortunately, they got folks out there, like I said a few minutes ago, that they think that just because they got a fancy piece of paper from a institution of higher learning that says, "See right here, I is smart," they're automatically supposed to believe everything they say. And some of these people, once they start talking, after a while listening to them, you're like, you guys ain't as smart as you're making yourselves out to be. See, I misspoke. And anyway, the topic I'm going to speak on is the fabled lost continent of Atlantis. And there was another one, Lemuria, but Atlantis is more well known. Anyway, there's been a number of people over the years who have been on Coast to Coast AM who have talked about Atlantis. There's God knows how many books written about Atlantis. They've got documentaries about Atlantis, and some that I have. And some folks say Atlantis has been found. Some people say it hasn't. But, Plato's dialogue, one thing that sticks out as where the story came from, is it said that the whole Earth, or at least in that region where Atlantis was to exist, it said the Earth just shook all day and night. It was like an earthquake that lasted for, all day and night. Who knows? 12 hours, 15 hours, I don't know. I mean, the story's 9,000 years old. All we know is what's been repeated. And we don't know if some of the story was lost in transition, if some of the story was deliberately changed by these folks that like to muddy the waters. And I've been in some earthquakes. I was a little kid out in California, Ventura to be exact, in the earthquake of 1971. And I was only about 6 years old at the time. And so all I really remember is the family getting huddled over by the kitchen and everything was shaking. Fast forward a number of years later to 1994, the Northridge earthquake. And I was living in Ventura, over by the ocean. I was about a 5-minute walk from the Pacific Ocean, the beach. And this earthquake happened. And I'm laying there in bed. Usually earthquake happens, it shakes for a couple seconds and stops. This one was like the Energizer Bunny. It kept going and going and going. I'm just sitting there looking at the ceiling going, okay, y'all going to fall or not? And then it finally stopped. And electricity went out. So I went and I grabbed my jeans, and I had a shoulder-mounted camcorder at the time. And I turned it on. I ran outside and started videotaping, going to see if I could find anything that, that maybe places have fallen down. There was no damage where we were at by the ocean. I'm expecting maybe a seismic sea wave to come and just obliterate the area. It didn't happen. You go inland, though, there was all kinds of devastation. Matter of fact, this documentary I have right here about the earthquake. And then I have one here somewhere that was the video that I made when I went out and trying to videotape stuff. It was all dark. You really couldn't see anything. But anyway, what I'm getting at is they said this, earth shook just all day and all night. Just massive, just shaking. Okay, I keep that in mind. I keep that in the back of my head. But you watch some of these documentaries or these books or these people that get on these shows, and especially with the internet, and you get these people say, oh, Atlantis has been found. Atlantis can only be in one location. Back in the 60s, folks thought the island of Atlantis might have been an island called Thera that was found out in the ocean, and it looked like this city. It just basically been abandoned, and if I remember right, I think they said it was like buried in volcanic ash, but it was like preserved in time. And then other folks find this big old round circle thing somewhere over on the continent of Africa. They say, oh, this is Atlantis. And they got people putting Atlantis all over the place. Atlantis can only be one place. And another thing that stands out in Plato's dialogues, it said Atlantis sank below the waves. It doesn't say the waters rose. It said Atlantis sank. Okay, it seems to me there must have been some eyewitnesses, survivors, that told the story. And they made it to safety, I guess, and told the story. Now, who knows how many times a story has been changed, but some of the basics stick out, or you can figure it out. Eyewitness accounts who were there when this tragic event happened, and they watched Atlantis sink below the waves, sink below the ocean. And obviously, if they had sailing vessels, boats, they very well could have made it to another piece of dry land. And there's all kinds of stories about that kind of thing, plus the island of Lemuria. I got to thinking about this, And the reason I got to thinking about this is because, unlike, probably like just like quite a few of you out there, I've been to some caves in my day. When I was a kid, I'd gone to Carlsbad Caverns. I'm not sure exactly what the right pronunciation is, but I remember it was called like Alasa Cave, over by Tucson, Arizona. I've been to Mammoth Cave. I've been to the Lost Sea in Sweetwater, Tennessee, which is basically it's 4 acres of water underground. And some of these caves that I've been to, they're not that far below the surface. And I've also been to Ruby Falls and Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. Now that is an interesting one. And the reason I say that is because during the Civil War, they had this large mountain. They had blasted their way through, so to put a train through. Now, one of the folks back then, obviously somebody in charge, wanted an elevator shaft from the top of the mountain down below to where the train was in Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, Big Rock. And so they were dynamiting their way down. And any of you who have been to Ruby Falls know the story, as the tour guide tells it. And anyway, they're dynamiting their way down to build this elevator shaft. They got part way down, and all of a sudden there's a hole off here on the side. I'm like, what's this? Well, it was big enough that folks could crawl through, so they went in there with either their torches or lanterns or whatever they had to illuminate the area, and they're like, wow, this is something else. They kept hearing this sound far off distance. So they're, walking, trying to get closer to the sound. And it's about a quarter mile or so. I'm not sure, between a quarter mile and a half mile down. And there's a path. And they come to this area that basically, it's the end. And there's water coming out of the ceiling, emptying out into this big vat, probably not quite as big as the room I'm in right now. It's like a pool. It empties in, and then it dissipates back into the earth. Where's this water coming from, and where's it going? And obviously that water's been flowing for a long time, so that water table is ginormous. But I'm telling you this to tell you this. I told you that to tell you this. If they had been just a couple feet further to the side, they would have never discovered Ruby Falls. And I got to thinking about this. I stumbled onto Ruby Falls back in 1987 after I got out of the service. And Ruby Falls was a void space, a void below the surface of the earth. Now, that plus the other caving that I have done over the years, just basically tour guides, just gone on tours and stuff. Some of these caves are not far below the surface at all. In fact, one in Missouri that I went to, they got billboards for it. There's a guy that has a Jeep and he has a wagon, and people get in there and they take you through a guided tour. It's right below the surface of these people's property. And a lot of these caves, of course, were found on accident. Now, Ruby Falls did not have a surface entrance. It was discovered by accident. A lot of these places did have surface entrances. Or they're maybe doing some digging and boom, they found a hole. And so anyway, I started putting all this together in my head years and years ago. And the story I'm about to tell you, I told George Norrie, I think it's probably been over a year ago, maybe a couple years ago, on Coast to Coast AM. So this is the theory, this is Erik the Mind Control Guy's theory on what I think happened to Atlantis. I don't have a fancy degree that says I is smart. No, I'm just a regular working stiff out here. I can read. I do have a brain. I do have, experience at various things. I have had experiences that nobody should have ever had to experience. Anyway, just picking up on things, Plato's dialogues, my own experience in caves of one kind or another. Now, for those who study this kind of stuff, and I only know a handful of caves, but there are those who have made this their passion in life, is caves. And some of them could probably rattle off every cave ever discovered on this planet. Now, they all know about the ones that they know about, but they don't know about the ones that they don't know about. Ones that have never been discovered, yet still exist. For all the swaggering, arrogant skeptics that make an effort not to believe in anything. Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean they don't exist. There's all kinds of caves and voids below the surface of the land. But I've often wondered how many voids exist below the sea floor, below the ocean floor, or a lake floor, or a river floor. Not all voids are just below the surface. What if there's giant voids, many miles in circumference, that are many miles below the ocean floor, or below the land, regardless if the land's here or here, inside of a mountain? Any number of things, any number of infinite possibilities. And just because they have yet to be found does not mean that they do not exist. So here is my theory on what I think happened to Atlantis. Erik the Mind Control Guy's theory of what happened to Atlantis. I think what happened to Atlantis is simply this. When the earth shook all day and all night, I think that very well what could have happened, or what did happen, even George Norrie agreed with me. That's saying a lot. That below the bottom of the Atlantis island seafloor, I believe that probably starting at about a half a mile below Atlantis, I would say maybe the center, was the ceiling of a giant void, I would say probably about a mile or so deep. And just say for the sake of discussion, not for the sake of argument, but for the sake of discussion, let's just say this giant void where the ceiling would start about a half a mile below the bottom of the Atlantis island or continent was this giant void about a mile or so in circumference, sticking out about a quarter mile or so wider than what the island was. And at the top of that ceiling of that void, because of all this shaking, a crack happened. And we've all seen this before. Violent shaking of one kind or another, all of a sudden there's a crack. And I think that crack in that ceiling of that void below Atlantis started working its way up. And as it worked its way up, it also worked its way out. You know, start here. And I think by the time that crack went up and out, all that sediment and rock falling, that by the time it got to the bottom of Atlantis, or close to it, weight notwithstanding, Atlantis began to sink, began to fall into the sea. That's what it appeared from the people on the ocean surface. Atlantis sank into the sea. And as it went into that void, the water was pulling in the sides, the sand, the rock, the sediment, whoosh. So if the ceiling of that void started, let's say, about a half a mile below the bottom of Atlantis, and that void was maybe a mile deep, and Atlantis fell into it, and then was covered up, regardless of where Atlantis was. The ocean's pretty big. Pacific, Atlantis, or Atlantic Ocean, all these oceans are huge. And nobody seems to know where it was. They have an idea, because they've talked about the Rock of Gibraltar. But if Atlantis sank below the seas, sank into that void, and then the sides came in, and the water, whoosh, how come we can't find Atlantis? Because it's buried about a mile or more below the ocean floor. And with 9,000 years of water and sediment, unless you knew exactly where it was, you ain't going to find it. And if it's a mile or so below the ocean floor, with all that water, seawater and all that, how would you get to it anyway? And I think, my theory is, the reason we haven't been able to find the lost continent of Atlantis is just because it's about a mile or more below the ocean floor, buried for eternity. So that's the Erik the Mind Control Guy theory on what happened to Atlantis. I don't have a college degree, but I do have a brain. And I am not going to let, certain theories, we got all these rules we have to go by. I'm not going to let that nonsense get in the way of something that appears to be the obvious. I mean, sometimes if something is buried, yet you never knew it was buried, but everybody that knew it was buried is dead and gone, or every record of this event happening has been destroyed, everybody that knew about it is gone. Okay, now you have a situation where nobody today knows that such events happened. I'm not talking about Atlantis because everybody talks about Atlantis. I'm talking about other events. They said, well, there's no record about it. Not everything that exists, not everything that ever happened is documented. And that's what some of these people with all their fancy degrees that says I is smart can't get through their arrogant heads. Not every single event that ever happened makes the history books. There's no documented record that I created this library. My wife and I won't take full credit. My wife and I, we built this library that I'm sitting in. There's no documented record of that, but it happened. There is all kinds of events that happened that never made the history books. And there's times where some folks who tried to create documentation or records of it, events that have happened, sometimes those people were whacked and all their evidence was destroyed. So now there's no evidence at all that certain events ever happened, even though they did happen. But the swaggering, arrogant skeptics that make an effort not to believe in anything unless they see cold, hard facts, it didn't happen, we don't believe it, and how dare you believe that it happened? That's their mindset. All their fancy degrees, and that's still their mindset. I could care less about those people and all their fancy degrees. There's folks out here who see things or have seen things that, according to the skeptics out there, there's no way those things could possibly exist, yet there they are. Oh, they died out 65 million years ago, yet people still report seeing them in Africa or down South America. Oh, these kind of people don't exist. Just because you didn't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. Granted, I know that you got these, I really can't describe them without using some serious sentence enhancers. Some folks call them cuss words. I call them sentence enhancers. These despicable individuals that love to hoax and fabricate things. They beg people to believe them and then laugh at them because they did. I can't believe you fell for that. I can't believe you're that much of a dishonest dirtbag that you would deliberately create something like that. And when the waters get so muddied, nobody knows what to believe anymore. That's the goal of some of these dirt bags out here. To muddy the water so bad, you don't know what to believe. And I want to tell people like that, well, piranha fish really don't exist. Why don't you just go jump in the water? Anyway, I got to get going. I got things to do today. But I wanted to put this out there. I told this story to George Norrie well over a year ago. Might have been a year and a half, 2 years ago. On what I thought, this guy you're looking at, what I thought happened to Atlantis. I've never heard this before. I come up with that out of here. See? Brain. I have one, and so do you. Sometimes I don't listen to the experts, because sometimes the experts are just a bunch of bullshit artists. Or they're not allowed to think outside of the box. And so, even though they want to, they can't, because they'd be ridiculed, criticized, ostracized, because they thought outside the box. I don't have to worry about that. Some people think I'm batshit crazy, and I could care less. I've experienced things that no one should ever had to experience. Just because it never happened to you, or you never saw it, doesn't mean that it didn't happen to somebody else. Anyway, I got to get going. But I wanted to put this out there. This was my theory about what happened to Atlantis. I believe what happened to Atlantis, that it sank below the ocean floor into a giant void and was covered up, and it will probably never, ever be found. Take care.